What is the scariest or most disturbing crime that remains unsolved today? Ashley Freeman and Lauria Bible disappearance. Their home set on fire, all of their belongings in the rubble, and the rest of the family shot from the back. Despite a nearly nationwide effort to find the girls, no trace of them has ever been found. Back when I was at Ohio State, a medical student named Brian Schaffer went missing. To this day, he has never been found. The really crazy part is that he was last seen going into Ugly Tuna, a popular bar in a crowded part of the campus area that is filled with surveillance cameras. There is video of him entering the bar, but never exiting. Part of me wonders if he is somehow still hidden in the bar, with nobody having found him. The Icebox Murders. Houston's so-called Icebox Murders of Fred and Edwina Rogers, an elderly couple living in Montrose, may be one of the strangest cases yet. On June 23, 1965, Edwina's nephew Marvin became concerned about the couple when his phone calls to his aunt went unanswered. Marvin asked police to check in on the couple, who complied. When police responded, they found the house locked, but forced their way in. Food had been left on the table, which somehow led to the officers checking inside the fridge. What they found: numerous cuts of washed, unwrapped meat was neatly stacked on the shelves, which the officer thought came from a butchered hog. Didn't seem all that out of the ordinary. But as the officer went to shut the door, he saw the Rogers heads staring back at him. They had been stashed in the vegetable crisper. That meat turned out to be the Rogers' legs and torsos. Investigators said that a claw hammer had been used to beat Fred to death, and both of his eyes had been gouged out. Police determined that Edwina had been shot in the head, and both had been hacked into pieces in the bathroom. The house was eerily devoid of blood, and appeared to have been thoroughly cleaned. Stranger still was that their sex organs had been thrown in the sewer outside of the house, and that other missing body parts were never recovered. Also, there was the 43-year-old unemployed hermit son, Charles Frederick Rogers, who apparently lived with his parents in an attic bedroom, but whom neighbors didn't recall ever seeing. The only drops of blood in the house led to the son's attic room, and a bloody keyhole gave more of a hint as to what was to come. But when investigators entered, no Charles. In fact, he just disappeared and was declared legally dead in 1975, 10 years after the murders. In 1992, the authors of the book The Man on the Grassy Knoll theorized that Charles was a CIA agent who was involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. According to their work, Rogers was a CIA agent who likely impersonated Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico City and, along with Charles Harrelson, was one of two shooters involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. There's no telling who Charles actually was, considering he communicated with his parents only by writing notes that were slipped under the door and didn't appear to interact with any other actual human beings ever. Don't remember the name, but some hiker found a small cave with a skeleton stashed inside. Had a hole in the head like a gunshot wound, which was confirmed by forensics, but the problem was the skeleton was 800 years old. Not the scariest for everyone as a whole, but disturbing for my family. My husband's mother was murdered when he was 15. She had just made manager at a convenience store after being a housewife her whole adult life. On her very first day a man came in, robbed her, and told her to lay on the floor. He then leaned over, shooting her twice in the arm, then once in the head. The story has been on AMW and Unsolved Mysteries, but the man was never caught. A while back in the mid-90s there was an ongoing spree of murders in the Maryland area and DC area. The murders were done by an African-American mailman mid-30s. What he would do, before he would attack his victims, is he would study their every movements, so he would know the right time to attack. Luckily his last victim actually made it out alive, because she screamed the top of her lungs and her next door neighbor heard her, and he ran to help her out. The story pretty much ended from there, because he hasn't been back since and nobody has heard of him. In fact, he is on America's Most Wanted top 10 list. In Argentina, Alberto Nisman was a federal prosecutor. He was in charge of an exhaustive investigation concerning the AMIA terrorist hit. AMIA is the name of the Jewish community organization in Argentina. Their building was bombed in 1994. Nussman appeared on TV several times claiming that the actual president of Argentina, Cristina Kirchner, was somehow involved in this hit and that she helped cover the perpetrators. 1 or 2 days before the first day of court, he appeared dead in his house with a Ref King bullet in his head. The tapes of the building are not clear or deleted. Information is confusing. We don't know if it was a suicide because he realized his case was not good, or if it was a hit because his case was too good. It's not even the worst case we have here. The Icebox Murders. I guess it bothers me because it was mostly small children and someone just walked away from that after butchering that entire family and family friends while they slept. They also have the house set up where you can go visit. Rumor is it is haunted, but I'm not getting into that kind of discussion and debate. Can't be certain if this is exactly a crime, but Benjamin Kyle's case is pretty insane. He was found naked and unconscious in a dumpster behind a Burger King in 2004, having absolutely no idea how he got there and having no idea who he is. He never regained memory of anything in his life prior to 2004 and still does not know his identity. Despite DNA tests and extensive searches, no one has ever come forth to tell him who he is, and there are no past records of his existence. The Bloody Benders, America's first serial killer family. They had a small tavern set up in a lonely part of the West in the 1800s, and anytime someone came in whom they believed nobody would miss, they'd murder them and take all their valuables. When the law caught on to what they were up to, they fled and were never caught. In the early 1900s, a woman in San Francisco made a deathbed confession claiming to be the daughter of the family, but nobody knows whether or not she was telling the truth. The murder of Adam Walsh. At the age of 4, he was abducted from a Sears in 1981. His decapitated head was later recovered, but his body was never found. Otis Toole claimed he and Henry Lee Lucas were responsible for the murder, but that remained dubious as he and Lucas had confessed to hundreds of crimes with which they had been unaffiliated. Adam's father, John Walsh, has since gone on to be the host of America's Most Wanted and the CNN series The Hunt. For me, or would be the murder of my mother. She was murdered when I was 3 months old. She was holding me in her arms apparently when she was attacked. IDK if I was knocked out of her arms or what, but they say I was found in an alley next to her body where she was raped and strangled with her own pants. Had it not been for a fluke that a woman decided to throw away some trash in a dumpster that was in the alley of an abandoned apt building, I might not have been found, and apparently I was there for a couple of days. I really would like to know who murdered her. Hinterkaifeck. It was a mysterious murder of 6 family members on a rural German farm that took place in 1922. Weirder still, the murderer continued to live in their house for some time. Here's a small excerpt from an article about it. Before March 31st, Gruber had described to neighbors things that had happened in the past days and weeks. Things that made his maid, before Mariah, leave the farm. Footprints coming from the dense forest behind the farm but none leading back. Footsteps heard in the attic. An unfamiliar newspaper showed up. Keys went missing. When Gruber one day checked his tool shed, he could tell from the damage that someone had tried to pick the lock. Nobody knows exactly when the murder started. The autopsy reports could give us a clue if they indicated how long each person had been dead. Reading online about this case, people believe that all 6 were butchered one by one. Joseph was killed while in his cot in his mom's bedroom. Mariah was killed in her bedroom. Gruber, his wife, their daughter, and granddaughter were murdered in the barn. Though we lack estimated times of death, we know that the granddaughter died last from one horrifying detail: she had torn her own hair out. Apparently alive long enough to either witness the butchering or see the dead bodies before she was struck. The girl expressed the horror the only way she had left. The corpses were all beheaded. The skulls were sent to a lab, but are now considered lost. All victims were placed without heads in their coffins. The entire farm was demolished in 1923. The only thing left is a shrine. Why did I mention that the one who committed this crime stayed at the farm afterwards? Someone had fed the livestock, had eaten food from the kitchen, and neighbors noticed smoke coming from the chimney as usual, though the Gruber family was already dead. The Cleveland torso murderer from the mid to late 30s. The torso murderer always beheaded and often dismembered his victims. sometimes also cutting the torso in half. In many cases the cause of death was the decapitation itself. Most of the male victims were castrated, and some victims showed evidence of chemical treatment being applied to their bodies. The number of victims are at least 12, but is possibly over 20. They even brought in Elliot Ness, from Untouchable's fame, to help in the investigation. One suspected individual was Dr. Francis E. Sweeney. Sweeney was a veteran of World War I, who conducted amputations and patching in the field. Sweeney was later personally interviewed by Elliot Ness. During this interrogation, Sweeney is said to have failed to pass 2 very early polygraph machine tests. Both tests were administered by polygraph expert Leonard Keeler, who told Ness he had his man. Nevertheless, Ness apparently felt there was little chance of obtaining a successful prosecution of the doctor, especially as he was the first cousin of one of Ness's political opponents, Congressman Martin L. Sweeney, who had hounded Ness publicly about his failure to catch the killer. Shortly after Sweeney was released, the killer taunted Ness by putting 2 bodies within view of his office window. Another suspect was brought in for questioning and was found murdered in his prison cell. Ness ordered the shanty towns where the victims were being abducted from to be burned down, which severely bruised his reputation and he never recovered from it. Some say the murderer was responsible for the Black Dahlia murder as well. What's scary about it is that Sweeney most likely was the murderer, since the murders in Cleveland stopped after he committed himself to a mental hospital, and he possibly had help from a family member with political power, who used connections to keep him from being convicted. Sweeney would send postcards to Ness and his family mocking him for never finding the killer until the day he died.